Human accepted an alien slave as payment, only to discover she was a wealthy princess in the distant future. Humanity had reached the stars. Ships traveled between planets and across entire galaxies, bringing with them stories, cultures, and trades from all corners of the universe. On the outer edges of human space, where the planets were still wild and dangerous, lived a trader named Jax Hawkins. Jax wasn't rich, nor was he famous. He was a man of practical means, always looking for the next deal to keep his ship running and his crew fed. His ship, the Meridian, was an older model but reliable enough to make the journey between distant colonies. Jax was good at what he did. He knew how to barter, how to make connections, and how to survive in a world where anything could be bought for the right price. It was during one of these trading missions that Jax found himself on a Zorathian outpost, a remote station on the edge of Zorathian-controlled space. The Zorathians were an advanced alien species, taller and more powerful than humans. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had, and their empire was feared across the galaxy. The Zorathians had long ruled with strict authority, but lately they had been involved in the rapid expansion of their empire, establishing trading outposts like the one Jax now found himself in. As he walked through the crowded marketplace, Jax couldn't help but feel the strange tension that hung in the air. There was something different about this station. People spoke in hushed tones, and the Zorathian soldiers, tall, intimidating, and clad in dark armor, watched the crowds with cold, calculating eyes. Jax was here for business. He had a shipment of rare metal ores to sell, and he was hoping to strike a deal with the Zorathian traders. As he entered the market's center, he was greeted by a Zorathian merchant named Korath, who had arranged to meet him. "You bring the ores." Korath's voice was deep and slow, his alien eyes scanning Jax's every movement. "I do," Jax replied, shaking the merchant's hand. "But I've heard some rumors about the trade here. Something doesn't feel right." Korath laughed, his teeth sharp and yellow. "Rumors are a part of every deal, but don't worry. This is business, human. You'll get what you came for." They walked to Korath's stall, where a large number of items were being sold. Alien fabrics, weapons, and strange devices that Jax had never seen before. But as he looked around, his eyes caught a strange sight, something that made his heart skip a beat. At the back of the stall stood a woman. She was tall, like most Zorathians, but unlike the others, she had an air of quiet grace. Her features were sharp and her dark eyes gleamed with intelligence. She stood with her head slightly lowered, her hands bound by metal cuffs. The sight was a shock to Jax. "Who is she?" Jax asked, unable to hide the curiosity in his voice. Korath followed Jax's gaze and smiled in a way that made Jax uneasy. "She's part of your payment, a slave." Jax's eyes widened. "What? You expect me to take a slave as payment?" Korath nodded. "She's a valuable one, a Zorathian slave, but she has some worth." "It's a fair trade, considering the value of the ores you're selling." Jax was stunned. He'd heard of slavery in the galaxy, but he never imagined being directly involved in it. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered under his breath, but Korath had already turned his back, signaling that the deal was done. "You'll have her delivered to your ship in the morning. She's yours now to do with as you please." Jax felt a knot in his stomach. He didn't want to be part of something this barbaric, but he had no choice. He needed the deal to go through. The ores he'd traded were important for his business, and he couldn't afford to lose the transaction. With a heavy heart, he agreed to the terms, not fully understanding the consequences of what he was doing. The following day, as promised, a Zorathian guard arrived with the woman. Her face was stoic, her eyes cold and distant, as if she had long since given up on the world around her. Jax watched from the deck of his ship as the guard handed over the chains, and the woman was led up the ramp. The guard gave Jax a knowing look, then left without another word. Now the woman was standing before him. Jax wasn't sure how to act. Should he speak to her? Should he give her orders as if she were simply another piece of cargo? The silence between them stretched and Jax shifted uncomfortably. "I'm Jax Hawkins," he said awkwardly. "I don't know what's been done to you, but The woman cut him off with a quiet but firm voice. "Azara," Jax blinked. "What?" "My name," she repeated, her voice steady. "Azara." Jax felt a strange sense of relief hearing her speak, even if it was just her name. It made her feel human. Even if she was an alien, she was a person. But that didn't change the fact that she was now his responsibility, a living being bound to his service. "Azara," Jax said softly, trying to figure out what to do next. "You don't have to do anything. I'm not your master." Azara didn't respond right away. She merely stared at him as if studying him. Jax felt the weight of her gaze, the sharpness in her eyes that didn't match the way she had been treated. There was something about her that didn't fit the role of a slave. For days, Azara remained quiet, rarely speaking, and obeying Jax's orders without hesitation. She cleaned the ship, prepared meals, and did whatever was asked of her. But there were moments, small moments, when Jax saw something in her eyes that made him question everything he thought he knew. Once, while she was working in the cargo hold, Jax had watched her expertly repair a piece of machinery that had been malfunctioning for weeks. It was done with such ease and confidence that Jax was left speechless. He asked how she knew how to do it. "I've learned many things in my life," she replied cryptically, her voice distant. "Some things you would never understand." Jax didn't press further, but something in him felt uneasy. This wasn't just a slave. She was different. There was more to Azara than met the eye. As the days passed, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Azara's silence was heavy, like a wall between them, but he felt like she was waiting for something, waiting for him to see what she truly was. The tension between them grew, and Jax began to wonder just who this woman really was. Days passed since Jax had accepted Azara as part of the trade, and life aboard the Meridian felt like it had changed in ways he couldn't explain. There was something unsettling about her presence, something that tugged at his thoughts every time he saw her. She was no ordinary slave, and Jax could feel it deep down, even if he didn't fully understand why. Azara was quiet, too quiet for someone who had been taken from her home and forced into servitude. Jax had expected anger, fear, or even defiance. Instead, she remained calm, as though she had already accepted her fate. She obeyed orders without complaint, washing, cooking, and maintaining the ship. But there were moments when her eyes would wander to the stars outside, and Jax swore he could see something behind them. A sadness, perhaps, or even hope. It was hard to tell. One day, after a long trip to a distant mining colony, Jax had a small mechanical issue with the ship's engine. It wasn't a big problem, just a loose power conduit that needed to be tightened. Jax was used to fixing minor issues like this himself, but that day he decided to let Azara do it. "Azara," Jax said as he walked into the ship's engine room where she was organizing tools, "can you fix this?" She turned to him with a look that for a moment seemed almost amused. "I can," she said simply, and without waiting for further instruction, she moved toward the power conduit. Jax watched from the doorway as she worked. It was fascinating to watch her move, quick, efficient, and precise. She didn't struggle or look confused, as most people would when faced with unfamiliar technology. In fact, it almost seemed like she was more comfortable than Jax himself. Her fingers moved with a practiced grace, almost as if she had worked on this kind of system before. Jax blinked. How does she know how to fix this? He knew this was far beyond the typical skill set of a slave, even one who had been educated or trained. He felt a chill run down his spine. "How do you know how to do this?" he asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice casual, but there was a hint of suspicion in his tone. Azara didn't look up from her work. "Some things are taught, others are learned." Her words were cryptic, but they sent a shiver of doubt through Jax. "Taught? learned, who had taught her to repair spacecraft engines. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something far more to Azara than just a slave girl. The job took less than an hour, and when Azara was finished, she stood up and wiped her hands on a rag. "It's done," she said flatly, as if it was nothing extraordinary. Jax, however, could hardly believe it. What kind of slave fixes starships so easily? Over the next few days, strange things continued to happen. Azara's behavior became even more unusual. When they arrived at a new space station to trade for supplies, Jax noticed that she was always watching the crowd closely, as though she were reading their every movement. Her eyes would dart to the entrances and exits, tracking everyone who came and went. Jax didn't know why, but the way she observed everything made him uneasy. One evening, while they were sitting together at dinner, Jax decided to press her for answers. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. "Azara," he began, trying to keep his tone light. "You're not just a slave, are you?" She didn't answer at first. She simply picked at her food, her gaze distant. Jax felt a frustration building inside him. He had given her space, treated her kindly, but she never shared anything about herself. All he knew was that she was from the Zorathian Empire, nothing more. Finally, Azara looked up at him. Her expression was serious, but her eyes didn't betray any emotion. "I am exactly what I appear to be, Jax," she said softly. "Nothing more, nothing less." But Jax wasn't convinced. He could feel that she was hiding something, something important. The next morning, Jax was sorting through cargo on the ship when he heard a noise from the cockpit. Someone was talking, shouting, actually. Jax quickly made his way to the front of the ship, his heart pounding. He found Azara standing in front of the communication console, her hand resting lightly on the controls. "What are you doing?" Jax asked, his voice sharp. Azara turned to him, her face unreadable. "I was listening," Jax blinked. "Listening to what?" "The signal," she said, pointing to the blinking console. "It's a distress signal from Zorathian space." Jax felt a rush of cold air fill the room. A distress signal from where? Azara's eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping the console. "It's coming from a Zorathian ship, a vessel that's been lost for years." Jax stepped forward, confused. "But why would you?" Azara's expression changed in that moment. It was as though a mask had slipped, and for a brief instant Jax saw something far deeper, something that wasn't just the quiet, subservient woman he had come to know. "It's not just any ship, Jax," Azara said softly. "It's my father's ship." Jax froze. "What?" Azara's gaze was distant now, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes. "My father is the emperor of the Zorathian Empire," she continued, her voice quiet but full of weight. "I am his daughter, his only child." Jax's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't what he had expected. Azara was a princess. His mind raced as the truth began to sink in. "You're telling me you're a princess?" Jax's voice was barely a whisper. Azara nodded slowly. "I was cast away, my family betrayed, and my life was taken from me. They sold me as a slave to erase my existence." Jax struggled to process this new information. "But why didn't you tell me before? Why all the secrets?" Azara looked at him then, her gaze hardening for the first time. "I didn't trust you," she said flatly. "I couldn't." Jax felt his chest tighten. He had no idea who Azara really was, but now everything had changed. She was more than just the quiet slave aboard his ship. She was royalty, a member of one of the most powerful families in the galaxy. And now she was a fugitive. "Why didn't you escape?" Jax asked, his mind spinning. Azara's expression softened slightly. "I did, but the people who betrayed my family are still out there. I can't face them alone." For the first time, Jax understood. Azara wasn't just a woman in chains. She was a royal figure cast down from her throne, and now she was fighting for survival. "Are you going back?" Jax asked, his voice barely a whisper. Azara looked at him. "I must, but I need your help." Jax didn't know what to say. He had never expected his life to be so intertwined with an alien princess's fate. But as he stood there, looking into her eyes, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on her, not now. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you." Azara's eyes softened for the first time since he had met her. "Thank you." Jax didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The days following Azara's revelation felt like a dream to Jax. He had always thought of himself as a simple trader, a man who dealt in goods and occasionally got mixed up in galactic politics, but this was something entirely different. Azara was no ordinary woman. She was a Zorathian princess, the daughter of an emperor who had been overthrown by treacherous forces. The weight of this truth hung heavily between them, and Jax found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. They sat together in the common room of the Meridian, the ship's engine humming softly in the background. Jax couldn't stop staring at Azara. Her quiet dignity, her calm demeanor, everything about her seemed like it belonged to a life far beyond anything he had imagined. Yet here she was, stranded in the farthest reaches of space, far from the empire she had once been a part of. It didn't make sense. Azara had remained largely silent after her confession, though Jax could feel the tension in her words every time she spoke. She had shared more of her story since then, but each detail was more shocking than the last. Her family had been betrayed by members of their own council, powerful men and women who wanted to seize control of the Zorathian Empire. They had orchestrated a coup, overthrew her father, and locked Azara away as a symbol of their power. "I've been living in the shadows ever since," Azara had told him quietly. "They thought if they erased me, they could erase the bloodline, but they don't know what they've done. I will not be forgotten." Jax wasn't sure what to believe, but he could see the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire that kept her alive, that had allowed her to survive in a galaxy that had tried to erase her. But as he looked at her now, seated before him, he knew he couldn't just leave her to her fate. He didn't know how, but somehow Jax had become part of her mission. She needed him, and that made him feel a sense of responsibility he'd never known before. "Do you have a plan?" Jax asked one evening, breaking the silence. Azara looked at him, her eyes steady. "I do," she said, "but it won't be easy." Jax leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Tell me." She stood up, moving toward the ship's main console. With a few swift gestures, she brought up a map of the galaxy, showing various star systems, all marked with glowing points of interest. "This is where my father's ship went missing," she said, tapping a red dot on the map. "The Sovereign, my father's flagship, disappeared on a diplomatic mission years ago. We believed it was destroyed, but I've recently learned that it may still be out there, somewhere on the edge of Zorathian space." Jax narrowed his eyes. "And you want to find it?" Azara nodded. "Yes. If we can find the Sovereign, we can expose the traitors who betrayed my family. We can restore my father's legacy. But it's not just about that. It's about proving that the Zorathian people will never forget their true ruler." Jax had been thinking hard about their next move, but this sounded far more dangerous than anything he'd ever done. A mission like this would put them in direct conflict with the Zorathian Empire, and if they were discovered, it could mean the end for both of them. "How do we even begin?" Jax asked, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Azara glanced at him, her gaze unwavering. "We start by finding allies. We can't take on the Empire alone, Jax. We'll need ships, resources, and most importantly, the support of people who still believe in the old ways, the ways of my family." Jax nodded slowly. He wasn't sure how they'd find these allies, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back out now. There was no turning back. The following days were a blur. Azara led him through the ship systems, showing him how to access hidden communication networks. They started reaching out to old contacts, people who might be sympathetic to her cause. The more they reached out, the more they realized how many had fallen under the control of the traitors. There were few who still remembered the true legacy of the Zorathian Empire, but they were out there, somewhere. One night, as they were preparing for their next step, Jack sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the endless stretch of space. His thoughts were heavy with doubt. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he couldn't deny the pull to help Azara. There was something about her, something that made him want to believe in the impossible. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a soft voice behind him. "Jax!" He turned to see Azara standing in the doorway. Her face was shadowed by the dim light, but there was something different in her eyes, something almost vulnerable. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked, stepping into the cockpit. Jax sighed. "I'm not sure I know what I'm getting into, Azara. This is bigger than anything I've ever dealt with." Azara nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "I know, but you've already helped me more than anyone else ever has, and I won't forget that." Jack stared at her, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had never been one to get involved in politics or royal family drama. He was a trader, a man of the stars who preferred to keep things simple. But with Azara, everything had changed. He wasn't just helping a princess, he was helping someone fight for their rightful place in the galaxy. "I don't know what happens next," Jack said quietly, "but if we do this, we need to be ready for anything." Azara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "We will be." That was the moment everything shifted. Jax knew there was no going back, but he also knew that the path they were about to walk would be dangerous. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. But one thing was certain, they would face it together. As they prepared to leave the station behind and venture deeper into Zorathian space, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. What awaited them out there, in the unknown reaches of the galaxy, he couldn't say. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. Azara wasn't just a princess seeking revenge, she was a leader. And Jax had a role to play in her fight. The journey through space was long and uneventful, but the tension in the air was thick. Every day, Jax and Azara worked together, making preparations for the next stage of their mission. They had set their sights on the distant sector of Zorathian space, where Azara's father's flagship, the Sovereign, was believed to be hidden. The closer they got, the more Jax could feel the weight of what they were about to do. Jax had never been a fighter. He was a trader, a man who negotiated deals and lived by his wits. But with Azara, things had changed. He had grown to respect her strength, her determination, and the way she carried herself, despite everything she had lost. "You ready?" Azara asked one day as they approached the outer edge of Zorathian space. Jax glanced at the blinking map on the ship's console. They were just a few days away from their destination. His gut churned with nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." Azara stood by his side, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the ship. "We've come this far, we can't turn back now." Jax nodded. "I know. But once we get there, things won't be simple. We'll have to be careful." "We will be," she said, her voice steady. "I've been preparing for this moment my entire life." As the days passed, the distance between them and the target system grew smaller. The closer they got, the more cautious Azara became. She had made it clear that they had to be careful not to draw attention. Zorathian space was heavily patrolled, and they could easily be caught if they weren't careful. On the fourth day, as they neared the coordinates Azara had given him, a sense of dread hung in the air. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like they were walking into a trap, but Azara seemed confident. She didn't flinch or hesitate. She was focused on one thing, finding the Sovereign. As they reached the outer limits of the system, Azara's voice broke through the quiet of the cockpit. "There," she said, pointing to a small, faded signal on the screen. "That's it." Jack squinted at the display. A faint signal blinked in and out. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Sovereign was out there somewhere. "All right," Jack said, his voice tight. "Let's go find her." He maneuvered the ship toward the coordinates, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. They didn't have much time before the Zorathian patrols would get suspicious. If they were discovered now, they wouldn't stand a chance. The stars around them blurred as they entered deeper into the system. The ship's sensors pinged as they approached the coordinates, and Jax couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the ship's comm system. "This is Captain Korath of the Zorathian fleet," the voice boomed, unmistakable in its authority. "Identify yourself immediately." Jax's heart skipped a beat. It was one of the Zorathian patrol ships, and they had already been detected. Azara's expression hardened as she looked at the comm screen. "Don't answer them," she said, her voice low but firm. "We can't risk revealing ourselves just yet." Jax nodded and quickly cut the comm link. His hands flew over the ship's controls, maneuvering to avoid the approaching patrol. "Hang on," Jax said, pushing the ship into a sharp turn. The Meridian swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding the patrol ship scanners. "Where are we going?" Azara asked, her voice tense. "We need to get closer to the Sovereign," Jax said, his eyes scanning the controls. "We can't waste time. If we let them catch us, we're finished." Azara nodded. "I'll help you. Just keep the ship steady." Jax and Azara worked together, navigating the ship through asteroid fields and ion storms. The Zorathian patrol ship followed, but their attempts to intercept were blocked by the maze of debris they weaved through. After what felt like hours, the patrol ship finally gave up, disappearing into the distance. Jax let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Nice work," Azara said, a small but genuine smile crossing her face. Jax smirked, relieved that they had made it through. "I'm just glad we lost them." They continued on in silence for a while, their focus now solely on the mission. As they closed in on the signal source, the outline of a large ship began to materialize before them. It was damaged, drifting silently through the void, its once proud form now battered and broken. "There it is," Azara said softly, her voice full of emotion. "The Sovereign." Jax's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the ship. It was massive, easily twice the size of the Meridian, but it was clear that it had seen better days. The hull was riddled with scars, its weapons arrays were silent, and one of its engines was barely functional. "We have to board her," Azara said. "There's no other way to bring it back to life," Jax nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." He piloted the Meridian closer to the Sovereign, guiding it through the wreckage that surrounded the ship. As they made their way toward an open docking bay, Jax's heart raced. This was it. They were about to step onto a Zorathian warship, a ship that once commanded respect and power across the galaxy. As the Meridian docked, Jax powered down the engines and turned to Azara. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm but tense. Azara didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the ship in front of them. Jax could see the conflict in her eyes, fear, hope, and determination all mixed together. This wasn't just about finding her father's ship. It was about reclaiming her legacy, proving to the galaxy that she wasn't just some forgotten princess. "I'm ready," Azara said, her voice steady now. "Let's go." They suited up in their space gear, checking their weapons and supplies. The airlock hissed as it opened, and they stepped into the dark, silent corridors of the Sovereign. The ship was eerily quiet, its systems barely functional. It was clear that whoever had been aboard had abandoned it, leaving only the broken remains of a once great warship. Azara led the way, moving with a sense of purpose. Jax followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of life or danger. They reached the command center of the ship, and Azara paused at the entrance. She looked at Jax, her eyes filled with resolve. "This is it," she said. "If we can get the systems online, we'll have the power to take back my throne." Jax placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll do it together." With a deep breath, Azara stepped into the command center. The room was dark, but the control panels flickered to life as they approached. Azara's fingers danced over the controls, inputting the commands that would bring the ship's systems back online. Suddenly, the lights in the command center flickered, and the Sovereign hummed to life. The once-dead ship stirred as its engines powered up, the weapons arrays coming online, and the lights bathing the room in a harsh, artificial glow. Azara looked up at Jax, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We did it," she whispered. "It's time to take back my throne." Jax nodded, feeling the weight of their victory. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Together, they would rise from the ashes. And the Zorathian Empire would never be the same.